Okay, now it's time to take a look at dynamic props, which include mapping, cursor position, and just automatic values, right? Automation. I've got a basic studio background set up. I'm going to dive in and show you what dynamic props look like, because it's definitely one of the most powerful features of the component library. Let's go ahead and just add in a shape effect. I'm going to go ahead and add in a brushed metal effect, and we'll pick a 3D shape for the sake of this. A cube is an easy one. We can kind of see how things work. You can see rotation, and we can use dynamic props to drive some of these. Now, you'll notice as I go to the props panel over here, we have a bunch of different props, and those are all just static values. Like I could adjust the width, I could adjust the depth, I could adjust the rotation value, I could adjust the rounding, right? And so all of these are just static props. What if I wanted to, say, rotate this cube automatically? Actually, I'm going to reset a lot of this back to where it is, right, just to our default cube setting. And then what you'll notice next to any of these props is you have make value dynamic, right? That's our dynamic prop value. So I'm going to say maybe the Y rotation, right, this axis, I'm going to go ahead and make it dynamic. Now, in this particular component, we support two types of dynamic prop. And that is cursor-based, which is what you're seeing here, mouse-driven, and automatic. So mouse-driven, you're already seeing, all right, like just a little sneak hint. I'm moving my mouse, and the cube is spinning. So as I go to the left, it goes to the left, and as I go to the right, it goes to the right. And that's because I have tied the x-axis of the cursor position to the Y rotation, so rotating around the Y-axis, which is ironically lining up in a way that the cube looks like it's trying to follow the mouse. Now, I could make this a little more accurate, make it more look like it's trying to face the mouse by controlling some of the cursor-driven settings. So the settings we have, let's actually start down here on the bottom row. We have min and max. So this is at the far left and at the far right maximums, mins and max. What will the rotation look like, right? We're setting the value at minimum and maximum. So right now it's negative 180 degrees to the left and positive 180 degrees to the right. That's a long range of motion, and so it looks like it's spinning a lot as I move this around. If I was to bring that minimum value up to maybe somewhere in the, like, let's say negative 40 range, and we bring the maximum down somewhere in the positive 40 range, now it's a lot simpler. Now it's just only turning a little bit to follow the mouse. I can maybe make that a little bit more pronounced, maybe in the 60 to 60 range, and that feels like it's accurately following the mouse around. We also have curve settings. That sort of influences how we go from one end to the other. Is it a linear curve? Is it leaning more in one direction or more in the other? If I was to turn this all the way to -1, it would be really tempting to like stay to the left until I get way to the right, and suddenly it curves up until full right. Same thing on the other side, a maximum 1 value. It really wants to stay to the right until I get to the left. I'm going to go ahead and reset that back to 0, so it's just a normal curve. Now, we also have smoothing and momentum values, and these ones are fun because this is very sharp, right? Like as I move my mouse, it is following instantaneously. I may want to smooth that out over time. So if I add just a little bit of smoothing here, right, 0.2 is good. I can jiggle my mouse back and forth and it won't quite jiggle as fast. It's going to try and catch up over time. It's a lot more smooth, which is great for anything that is following a mouse around that you don't want to be way too hectic. Now I can move my mouse around like crazy and it's going to generally try and smooth itself over towards where the mouse is in a way that is not distracting. Let me turn that smoothing down here just to maybe 0.1, just enough that it's not pixel perfectly following it. We also have momentum. Momentum basically acts like a spring. So as I turn this all the way up, watch this. As I slide it to the left, it's going to bounce. I slide it to the right, and it bounces some more. So it's going to go past the intended point, and it's going to spring back into where it's supposed to be. So that is momentum and smoothing. I tend to keep both of those probably in the 0.1 to 0.2 range, and you end up with something that feels organic. It's not perfectly tracking the mouse, but it's pretty good. Now, let's take a look at what happens when you combine dynamic props. So here I have cursor driven on rotation Y, but we could also do rotation X, and we could do it using the Y-axis of the mouse. So let's do that. I'm going to reset X just to the default value. Doesn't matter. It's going to get overwritten. I'm going to say, make this dynamic. and then I'm going to set the axis to Y. So now it's following that motion. Now I do want to rein in our minimum maximum like we did last time. I'm going to bring that down to maybe 30 and 30 in that range, because we do have less horizontal distance on this particular aspect ratio, right? It's wider on the horizontal and it's shorter on the vertical. So now we have something, look at that. It literally looks as if that face of the cube is trying to follow my mouse around. Now the y-axis has no smoothing, the horizontal axis has some smoothing. So maybe we want to make those match just so it feels consistent. And there you go. A cube that is following my mouse position to always look at it. And this is cool as is with a cube, but you could use this with your logo or with literally any of the props. Which brings me to some of the other props that we have available. Let's go to... maybe we just play with the height a little bit, right? We can control the height or the depth, maybe the rounding. That could be a fun one. So, the rounding, we have... look at that. It is bouncing to a crazy rounding value. I was worried for a second it disappeared. No, it's just bouncing to the rounding is too tight. So I'm going to actually go ahead, reduce our maximum value here to a much smaller value. We don't need to round it anywhere near as much. Something like that. Okay. 0 to 0.1 seems to be a good rounding value for this particular shape in this particular configuration. Now, what you've noticed, or may have noticed, is that we're using auto mode, right? This is the second of the dynamic prop modes, and this mode is just automatically animating over time. In this case, I've set it to ping pong, which means it's going to animate in and out, in and out. It's like a heartbeat that just keeps going. So it's going to animate from the minimum value to the maximum value at a target speed. This is 1. I can make this slower by bringing the speed down. Now it's barely moving. Or I could crank that speed up and it will just pulse like crazy. There you go. You've got a cube that is going from sharp to rounded, and it is following our cursor as we go quite effectively. So that is dynamic props. There's one more type of dynamic prop I can show you with this, and that is positioning. So this particular prop, we are using cursor-driven, we're using automatic, and now let's also use cursor-driven for a position. So the center position, I can drag this around. You'll see our center position moves, but I could also reset it to the center point, 0, 0, make it dynamic, and now it's going to follow the mouse, which is interesting because it's also pointing in the direction of the mouse, with that association being the center point. So it's kind of almost like it's now facing away from the center point wherever it is, which is an interesting effect. Now you have very similar controls. You have smoothing. I'm going to increase that, and momentum, right? So now everything feels the same way it does. It's all using the same smoothing, same momentum. But we also have controls like reach. So right now I can move this off screen, which is cool, but maybe that's not the look you're going for. Let me bring the reach down. And what you will see is that we are limiting how far the position can move from the designated point that you've actually set. So you can set a point and have that dynamic follow happening at the same time. This is useful in this context where here I am wanting it to like slowly move a little bit in that direction, but not completely get off the screen. I might allow it to do a little bit more. And there you go. Now I've got a cube that is rotating and kind of tracking in the right direction, but it won't leave the screen. There's also a few options down here for adjustments. The first one, or the first two, lock X and lock Y. If I lock the X position, it can now move up and down, but it can't move side to side. If I lock the Y position, it can now move side to side, but it cannot move up and down. And then we have some fun ones. We have inversing for horizontal and inversing for Y. So now it's going to move in the opposite direction of my mouse in terms of horizontal. And now in vertical as well. I've done vertical and horizontal. So you can literally make it go in complete different directions from where your cursor is, which kind of gets trippy after a while. So those are dynamic props for cursor-driven, for auto animation, and for positional data for center points and for position points. But there's more we can do. Take a look at this. This is actually one of my most exciting features that I like. Let's take a look at what I call prop mapping, or the map mode. This is a dot grid. It is just a collection of dots. You can decide how big the dots are. You can decide the density of the dots. But these have maps as well. These are dynamic props. Let's go ahead. I'm just going to turn off dot grid just for a second so I can see. And I'm going to add some text. And I'm going to have that text say, hello world. I am going to, we'll delete that metal effect. We don't need that. I'm going to grab hello world. I'm just going to set it to Geist. We will just reduce the spacing a little bit. We'll make it big. Hello world. There you go. Yeah, that works. Now let's turn it off and turn on dot grid. So if you remember masking, we could use a layer like the text as a mask. And I could do that right now. I could say I want the dot grid to be masked by the text. And if I did that, you would get dots that fit the grid, and it looks good. You've got like text actually made of dots. But look closely. If I zoom in here, you'll notice the dots are cut off at the edge of the text because we're masking 1-for-1 on the pixels, right? We're saying this dot is partially in and partially out of the text. Get rid of it. So that's not going to work in this particular scenario if we want to make text out of dots, for example. But let's go back to where we were before. We have just a regular dot grid. Now we're going to use map mode. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come in here to dot size, right? Because if we have a dot size of 0, the dot's gone. And if it's full, it, takes up all the space. Doesn't matter what value I set it at. I'm going to use dynamic prop mode. Now you'll notice we have mapping as an option. With mapping, if I click on source, I could say text. And just like masking, we have what channel do we want to use, in this case, the alpha of the text. And what you'll notice is, look at this, we actually have pixel perfect dots that don't get cut off because they're driven by the text. So if I was to drop this density down, you could actually like fill up the text with this dot grid. Now this is cool, but it gets even cooler when you start introducing softness into this equation. So if I was to go ahead, and I'll just disconnect mapping mode for now, we'll just say there's no source on that. I'm going to turn on our text, and I'm going to turn on, let's say we'll add a sine wave to it. That's a nice soft shape. It fades from white into transparent. I'm going to select both the sine wave and hello world, and I'm going to group them into what I'm going to call our map source. Right, so there's our map source, and we're just going to turn it off. Okay, so now jumping from that into this, let's take a look at dot size when we use the mask source. So if I select map source for this, now look at that. We've got hello world written in dots, and as I zoom into 100% here, our sine wave is making those dots fade out to 0 over time. So we don't end up with a sharp edge, and we actually control the size of the dots. Now, what if I was to come in here to dot grid, decrease the density? You can kind of see how those grow and shrink over time. You can use this with nearly any effect. Most props support dynamic map propping, and it just creates these really cool looks, right? So I could imagine, just to use this as an example, I could imagine turning off the dot grid. I could imagine turning on something like a color wheel, which I've been using this a lot in our tutorials, but it's a good one for showing color. And now masking based on that new dot grid. There you go. We've got dynamic propping, creating dot-driven text and a sine wave with this nice smoothing effect. And now we're using that to mask a color, so it all looks very colorful. Just like that, we've created a bunch of stuff. We've explored dynamic map propping. There is a lot that you could do with this, so I'm going to just go ahead, get off the camera, and let you guys go explore.